I never thought a simple act of curiosity would lead me to the brink of unraveling my entire life. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and I was stuck at home, nursing a cold that had kept me from work. Nolan was at the office, and I had the house to myself. I was sipping on some herbal tea, trying to find something to occupy my restless mind when I stumbled across it. A diary, hidden behind a stack of old cookbooks in the kitchen cabinet. My name is Elara, and I'm married to Nolan Winslow. We've been together for 8 years, and as much as I love him, his family, especially his mother Sylvia, has always been a thorn in my side. Sylvia is the kind of woman who can make you feel small with just a glance. A retired school principal who never really stopped being in charge. She's charismatic, sure, but there's an edge to her that's hard to ignore. As I flipped through the pages of the diary, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. What secrets could Sylvia possibly have hidden here? At first, it was mundane, lists, schedules, reminders. But then I hit the jackpot. Page after page, she had laid out her thoughts, her manipulations, and her disdain for me. Elara is not right for Nolan, one entry read. She lacks the refinement our family needs. I felt my heart sink. It wasn't just that she didn't like me. She was actively working to undermine my place in the family. I could feel my pulse quicken, a mix of anger and betrayal coursing through me. How could she write such things? And why did Nolan never see it? The sound of the front door opening snapped me back to reality. Nolan had come home early. I quickly shoved the diary back into its hiding spot, deciding to confront him later. As he walked into the kitchen, I tried to play it cool. "Hey, you're home early," I said, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I thought I'd surprise you," he replied, leaning in for a kiss. "How are you feeling?" "Better," I lied. "Just needed some rest." We made small talk over dinner, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying Sylvia's words over and over. After we'd finished eating, I knew I couldn't keep it in any longer. "Nolan, can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, what's up?" I took a deep breath. "I found something today. Something that concerns us." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided to just rip off the Band-Aid. "I found your mom's diary. She's been writing some pretty harsh things about me." Nolan's face went blank, a mix of disbelief and confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I'm serious, Nolan. She's been plotting against me, against us. She doesn't think I'm good enough for you." He shook his head, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "Elara, you're overreacting. My mom can be difficult, but she wouldn't do that." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "I'm not overreacting. I read it myself." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I know things aren't perfect between you two, but she's my mother. Maybe you're just misinterpreting things." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Misinterpreting? "Nolan, she's trying to sabotage our marriage." He looked at me, eyes pleading for understanding. "I just think you're reading too much into it. She's old-fashioned, sure, but she loves us." The conversation ended in a stalemate, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. I knew then that I couldn't rely on Nolan to see the truth. Sylvia had her hooks in him deep, and it was up to me to find a way to protect myself. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Sylvia's disdain was deeper than I'd realized, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The diary was a warning, and I couldn't afford to ignore it. As I drifted into a fitful sleep, one thought lingered in my mind. How far was Sylvia willing to go to get rid of me? And more importantly, what was I willing to do to fight back? The morning after confronting Nolan, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to reconcile the woman I saw with the one I felt inside. My mind was a storm, a mix of frustration and determination swirling around. I knew I had to keep my cool, but the tension was becoming palpable. Nolan and I moved around each other with the careful choreography of a couple trying not to ignite an argument. The air was thick with unspoken words as we prepared for another day. As I reached for my coat, ready to head out, Nolan finally broke the silence. "Elara, I'm sorry about last night," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "It's not just about last night, Nolan. It's about everything. Your mother, the way she treats me." He sighed, a familiar weariness in his eyes. "I know it's hard, but she's my mother. She's just protective." "Protective?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "She's trying to control our lives, Nolan." He looked at me, his expression caught between understanding and denial. "I'll talk to her, okay? Try to smooth things over." I nodded, though I knew it wouldn't change much. Sylvia had her ways, and I needed to find mine. Later that day, I met up with Mia for coffee. She was my rock, the one person who always had my back. As soon as I sat down, she could tell something was off. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, handing me a steaming cup. "More like a ghost is haunting me," I replied, trying to smile but failing miserably. "Spill it," Mia insisted, leaning in. I told her about the diary, about Nolan's reaction, and Sylvia's ever-tightening grip. Mia listened, her face a mix of concern and anger. "That woman is a piece of work," she said, shaking her head. "And Nolan needs to grow a spine." I nodded, grateful for her blunt honesty. "I just don't know what to do. It feels like I'm fighting a losing battle." Mia reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're stronger than you think, Elara. Don't let her win." Her words were comforting, but as I left the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing. And I was right. That evening, as I was sorting through some old files at home, I stumbled across something unexpected. Tucked away in a folder was a letter addressed to Nolan from a law firm. My curiosity piqued, I opened it, and what I read left me cold. It was a proposal for a new real estate venture, one that involved Jasper and, surprisingly, Sylvia. The letter detailed plans that would require significant financial backing, something Nolan hadn't mentioned. When Nolan came home, I was ready. "Why didn't you tell me about the real estate deal with Jasper and your mom?" I asked, holding up the letter. He looked taken aback, then defensive. "It's just something Jasper is working on. I didn't think it was a big deal." "A big deal?" I echoed. "It involves a lot of money, Nolan." "Our money." He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. "I was going to tell you once it was more concrete." I could feel the frustration bubbling up again. "This isn't just about the money. It's about trust, Nolan. You're keeping things from me." He finally met my eyes, the conflict clear on his face. "I didn't want to worry you." "Well, I'm worried now," I replied, my voice steady but firm. "I need to know what's going on in our lives, not just be a spectator." The conversation ended with an uneasy truce, but the tension between us was growing. I could feel the cracks widening, and I knew I had to act before everything fell apart. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. At first, I chalked it up to stress, but as the day went on, the feeling persisted. By lunchtime, I was sitting at my desk, trying to ignore the uneasy sensation in my stomach. Mia's words echoed in my mind, and I decided to take a detour on my way home. The pharmacy was quiet, and I grabbed a pregnancy test, my heart pounding in my chest. Back home, I followed the instructions, my mind racing with possibilities. When the result appeared, I felt a mix of emotions, shock, confusion, and a flicker of hope. Pregnant. The word seemed to hang in the air, a new complication in an already tangled web. I knew this could change everything. Maybe this was the bridge that could bring Nolan and me back together. But deep down, I also feared it could be the final straw that broke us apart. The first sign that something was wrong came as a dull ache in my lower back, a persistent discomfort that I tried to ignore as I went about my day. But by the afternoon, the pain had grown sharper, and I found myself wincing with every step. I knew I couldn't brush it off any longer. Mia was the first person I called. "I'm worried, Mia. This pain isn't normal," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Go to the doctor, Elara." "Don't wait," she urged, her voice firm but caring. I took her advice and made an appointment for that afternoon. As I sat in the waiting room, my mind was a whirl of thoughts, about the baby, about Nolan, about Sylvia's looming presence in our lives. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of control. When the doctor finally called me in, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. After a series of tests and an ultrasound, the doctor's expression turned serious. "Elara, you're experiencing complications that require immediate attention," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "I'm recommending bed rest and a leave from work to ensure both your health and the baby's." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I nodded, trying to process the gravity of the situation. As I left the office, I knew I had to tell Nolan, but I dreaded the conversation. That evening, I sat on the couch, waiting for Nolan to come home. When he finally walked through the door, I could see the weariness etched on his face. "Hey," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. "How was your day?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "We need to talk, Nolan. It's about the baby." His eyes widened, and he immediately sat down beside me. "What's going on?" "The doctor says I need to take a leave from work. There are complications, and I need to be on bed rest." He looked at me, a mix of concern and confusion in his eyes. "Is everything going to be okay?" "I hope so," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But I need your support, Nolan. I can't do this alone. He nodded, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes, the conflict that always seemed to simmer beneath the surface. Of course, I'll be here for you. But as the days passed, it became clear that his words were just that, words. Nolan spent more time at his mother's house, supposedly discussing the real estate venture with Jasper. I couldn't help but feel abandoned, left to navigate this storm on my own. One evening, as I lay on the couch, trying to find a comfortable position, I heard a knock at the door. It was Sylvia, her presence as imposing as ever. "Elara, dear, I heard about your condition," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Thank you for coming," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. She sat down, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced air of someone who always takes stock of her surroundings. "I wanted to see how you're holding up." "I'm managing," I said, unwilling to show any weakness. Sylvia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You know, stress isn't good for the baby. Perhaps you should let Nolan focus on the real estate deal. It's important for our family's future." Her words were like a punch to the gut, a reminder of where her priorities lay. "I think Nolan should be focusing on his family, don't you?" She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, he can do both. He's quite capable." I forced a smile, though inside I was seething. "Thank you for your concern, Sylvia. I'll make sure to rest." As she left, I felt the weight of her visit linger, a reminder that I was fighting an uphill battle. But I couldn't let her win. Not now, not ever. The next day, as I lay in bed, trying to distract myself with a book, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Sylvia and Serena were in the hallway, their voices low but clear. "I just need Jasper to sign the papers," Serena was saying. "Once that's done, we can move forward. And you're sure he won't suspect anything?" Sylvia replied, her tone smooth and calculating. "Of course not. He's too caught up in the excitement to see the bigger picture." I felt a chill run down my spine. Serena was manipulating Jasper, and Sylvia was in on it. This was bigger than I'd realized, and I was caught in the middle. With my heart racing, I knew I had to act. But how could I expose their deceit without tearing the family apart? The stakes were higher than ever, and the path ahead was more uncertain than I'd ever imagined. The decision to confront Jasper weighed heavily on me, but I knew it was time to act. My mind raced with the implications of what I had overheard. Serena's deceit couldn't go unchecked, and if Sylvia was involved, the consequences could ripple through the entire family. But I couldn't let that stop me. I had to protect Jasper from becoming a pawn in their scheme. The next day, I invited Jasper over under the pretense of discussing some family matters. As I waited for him to arrive, my heart pounded with a mix of anxiety and resolve. I knew this conversation could change everything. When Jasper arrived, he was his usual charming self, all smiles and easy confidence. "Hey, Elara. What's up?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to say. "Jasper, there's something you need to know about Serena's plans." His smile faltered, replaced by a wary curiosity. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I overheard a conversation between Serena and Sylvia. They're planning something with the real estate deal, something that doesn't involve your best interests. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "That's a pretty serious accusation, Elara. I know it sounds unbelievable, but I'm telling you because I care about you," I said, trying to convey my sincerity. Jasper studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "And you're sure about this?" "As sure as I can be. I just want you to be aware, to look into it yourself." He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "I'll see what I can find out. Thanks for letting me know." As he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just set something in motion, the outcome of which I couldn't predict. Later that evening, Nolan came home, looking more exhausted than usual. He dropped his keys on the table and sighed heavily. "Long day," he muttered. I watched him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided meeting my eyes. "Nolan, we need to talk." He glanced at me, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. "About what?" "About everything. The baby, your mother, the real estate deal. We can't keep ignoring these things." He sank into the chair, rubbing his temples. "I'm trying, Elara. I really am." "Are you?" I challenged, my voice tinged with frustration. "Because it feels like you're letting your mother dictate our lives." He looked up, his expression conflicted. "She's just trying to help." "Help?" I echoed, incredulous. "She's trying to control you, Nolan. And it's tearing us apart." He didn't respond, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Before I could press further, the phone rang. It was Mia, her voice urgent. "Elara, you need to see this." "What's going on?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. Check the news. There's something you should know. I turned on the television, and there it was, a breaking news report about a scandal involving a local real estate deal. The details were still emerging, but it was clear that someone had leaked information about Serena's involvement in fraudulent activities. Nolan watched the screen, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. Is this? It's Serena, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I tried to warn Jasper. He stared at the screen, the weight of the revelation settling over him. What do we do now? I took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the situation. We need to talk to Jasper. Make sure he's okay. Nolan nodded, his resolve hardening. You're right. We need to get to the bottom of this. As we prepared to leave, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the turning point we needed, the chance to finally confront the truth and rebuild what had been broken. But as we stepped out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The power dynamics had shifted, and the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Yet for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The morning after the news broke, the Winslow household was a pressure cooker ready to explode. I could feel the tension in the air as I moved through the kitchen, trying to keep my hands busy to distract from the unease gnawing at my insides. Nolan was on the phone, his voice a low murmur as he spoke with Jasper, trying to piece together the fallout from the scandal. I could only catch snippets of their conversation, but it was clear that the situation was worse than any of us had anticipated. Jasper's reputation was at stake, and the family's name was being dragged through the mud. I knew that Sylvia wouldn't take this lying down. When Nolan finally hung up, he turned to me, his expression a mix of frustration and desperation. Jasper's in a mess, Elara. He's blaming Serena, but he's also furious that you didn't come to him sooner. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. I tried to warn him, Nolan. I did what I could. He nodded, running a hand through his hair. I know. It's just everything's falling apart. Before I could respond, the door swung open and Sylvia strode in, her presence commanding as ever. Her eyes were sharp, and I could tell she was ready for a fight. Have you heard from Jasper? She demanded, her gaze flicking between us. Yes, I just spoke to him, Nolan replied, his voice steady but strained. Sylvia turned her attention to me, her expression unreadable. And you, Elara? What do you have to say for yourself? I met her gaze, refusing to be intimidated. I told Jasper what I knew. He deserved to know the truth. She scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. The truth? You've caused nothing but chaos with your meddling. Nolan stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. Mom, Elara was just trying to help. Sylvia waved him off, her focus still on me. This is your fault, Elara. You've driven a wedge between us. I felt my temper rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'm not the one who kept secrets, Sylvia. If you're looking for someone to blame, maybe you should start with yourself. Her eyes narrowed, and I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. You think you can lecture me? You're nothing but an outsider, trying to tear this family apart. Nolan stepped forward, his voice firm. Enough, Mom. This isn't helping. Sylvia's gaze softened slightly as she looked at her son, but the tension remained. We need to fix this, Nolan. For the family's sake. As she left, the room fell silent, the weight of her words lingering in the air. I turned to Nolan, searching for some sign of solidarity. I'm sorry, Elara, he said, his voice low. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. We need to stand together, Nolan. We can't let her divide us. He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I'll talk to Jasper again. See if we can salvage something. As he left, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The stress of the past weeks was taking its toll, and I knew I needed to take care of myself, for the sake of the baby. But before I could rest, Mia called, her voice urgent. Elara, I just got a tip. There's more to this story than we thought. What do you mean? I asked, my heart skipping a beat. I'm not sure yet, but I have a feeling there's another layer to this. I'll keep digging. I thanked her, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this mess, a chance to expose the truth and protect my family. But as I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The stakes were higher than ever, and I was caught in the middle of a storm that threatened to destroy everything I held dear. I knew I had to be strong, to fight for my family and my future. But as the pressure mounted, I couldn't help but wonder if I was in over my head, if the cost of justice was more than I was willing to pay. The hospital room was a blur of white walls and beeping machines. I felt detached from my own body, watching from a distance as doctors and nurses moved around me with practiced efficiency. The pain was a constant, dull throb, but it was the fear that gripped me, cold and unrelenting. My baby had arrived too soon, and the world felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet. Nolan was there, his face pale and drawn as he hovered by my bedside. His presence was a comfort, but it also reminded me of the fractures in our relationship, the unresolved issues that loomed like shadows over us. "Elara, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. I managed a weak nod, words failing me. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said. The truth was, I felt more alone than ever, caught in a storm that showed no signs of abating. The door opened and Mia slipped in, her expression a mix of concern and determination. She gave Nolan a nod before turning her attention to me. "Hey, how are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle but steady. I tried to muster a smile, but it felt brittle. "I'm managing," I replied, though the truth was far more complicated. She sat down beside me, her presence a balm to my frayed nerves. "I've been looking into that tip I mentioned. There's definitely more going on with Serena and the real estate deal." I glanced at Nolan, who was listening intently. "What did you find?" Mia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It looks like Serena was funneling money through a shell company. There's a paper trail that ties back to Sylvia." Nolan's expression shifted, a mix of disbelief and anger. "Mom, are you sure?" Mia nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I'm sure." "I'm sorry, Nolan." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over us like a suffocating blanket. I could see the conflict in Nolan's eyes, the realization that his mother's influence was more insidious than he'd ever imagined. As the silence stretched on, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a reminder of the precariousness of my situation. The doctors had warned me that the stress could complicate my recovery, but how could I find peace when everything was falling apart? I turned to Nolan, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to protect our child, Nolan. We can't let this destroy us." He nodded, his resolve hardening. "You're right. I'll talk to Jasper, see if we can confront Mom together." But even as he spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late, that the damage had already been done. The Winslow family was in turmoil, and I was caught in the middle, struggling to hold on to the threads of my life. Later, as the room darkened with the approach of evening, I lay in bed, exhaustion pulling at me. I closed my eyes, trying to find a moment of respite, but the shadows of doubt and fear loomed large. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Sylvia stood there, her expression a mask of composed determination. She approached my bed, her eyes fixed on mine. "Elara," she began, her voice carefully measured. "I know things have been difficult, but we need to find a way forward for the sake of the family." I met her gaze, a flicker of anger sparking within me. "For the sake of the family? Or for your control over it?" She didn't flinch, her composure unbroken. "I've made mistakes, but I've always acted with the family's best interests at heart." I shook my head, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "Your best interests, Sylvia. Not ours." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond, the tension between us a palpable force. As she left, I felt the last vestiges of my strength slipping away, the enormity of the situation crashing over me like a tidal wave. My health was fragile, my family in disarray, and the path forward seemed impossibly steep. But even in the depths of despair, a flicker of resolve remained. I had to find a way to protect my child, to carve out a future where we could thrive, free from the shadows of manipulation and deceit. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges I could barely comprehend. But I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Moving into Mia's spare room felt like stepping into a new chapter of my life. Her apartment was filled with warmth and the scent of fresh coffee, a stark contrast to the tension I'd left behind. I was grateful for her unwavering support, particularly now, as the chaos of the Winslow family reached its peak. Nolan had called, his voice a mix of frustration and desperation. "Elara, we need to talk. It's about Mom and the business. Things are worse than we thought." I agreed to meet him at a small cafe, a neutral ground where we could speak freely. As I sat waiting, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. This was it, the moment where everything could change. Nolan arrived, looking more haggard than I'd ever seen him. He sat down across from me, his eyes searching mine for some semblance of hope. I spoke to Jasper. "He's devastated, Elara. Serena's betrayal hit him hard, and now he's questioning everything." I nodded, my heart aching for Jasper despite everything. "And Sylvia?" Nolan sighed, running a hand through his hair. She's in denial, trying to spin it like she was just protecting the family. His words hung between us, the weight of them pressing down on my chest. We need to confront her, Nolan. Together. He hesitated, then nodded, a flicker of resolve in his eyes. You're right. We can't let this continue. We left the cafe, our destination clear. Sylvia's house loomed ahead, a symbol of the control she'd exerted over our lives for far too long. As we approached, I steeled myself for the confrontation, my resolve hardening with each step. Sylvia answered the door, her expression a mix of surprise and wariness. Nolan, Elara. What's going on? We need to talk, Mom, Nolan said, his voice steady. About everything. She stepped aside, allowing us in. The air inside was thick with tension, the silence punctuated only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. What is this about? Sylvia asked, her tone guarded. Nolan took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. We know about the shell company, about how you and Serena manipulated the deal. Sylvia's eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through her composed exterior. I was only trying to protect us, to ensure our future. By lying and manipulating? I interjected, my voice sharp. You've hurt your family, Sylvia. This isn't protection, it's control. Her gaze shifted to me, a mix of anger and something else. Fear, perhaps. You don't understand what it takes to keep a family together. No, I said, my voice soft but firm. But I know what it takes to tear one apart. The room fell silent, the truth hanging heavy in the air. Sylvia's facade was cracking, the weight of her actions finally catching up to her. Nolan stepped forward, his voice filled with a quiet determination. Mom, it's time to stop. We need to fix this, but we can't do it if you keep trying to control everything. For a moment, Sylvia said nothing, her gaze flicking between us. Then, slowly, she nodded, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her own choices. I just didn't want to lose you, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Her vulnerability caught me off guard, a reminder that beneath her manipulations lay a fear of being alone. It was a moment of unexpected clarity, a chance for healing if we chose to take it. As we left, I felt a sense of resolution, a closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew we could face it together, free from the shadows of the past. In the car, Nolan reached for my hand, his touch a promise of better days to come. Thank you, Elara. For everything. I squeezed his hand, a smile breaking through the tension. We'll figure it out, Nolan. Together. The drive back to Mia's was quiet, the weight of the confrontation lingering, but no longer suffocating. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. This was our chance to rebuild, to create a future where love and trust could flourish. And as we pulled up to Mia's apartment, I knew we were ready to take that first step forward together. The air was crisp and clear as I stood in the park, watching the golden leaves flutter down from the trees. It had been a few weeks since the confrontation with Sylvia, and life had begun to settle into a new rhythm. The chaos of the past months felt like a distant storm, its echoes still present, but no longer overwhelming. Nolan and I had started co-parenting, finding a balance that worked for both of us and, most importantly, for our child. It wasn't easy, but there was a sense of peace in knowing we were doing our best to create a loving environment. Mia had been a constant source of support, her friendship a steady anchor as I navigated this new chapter. She was there with me now, sitting on a bench, her eyes on the stroller where my baby slept peacefully. You've come a long way, Elara, she said, her voice warm with pride. I smiled, feeling the truth of her words. I couldn't have done it without you, Mia. You've been my rock. She waved a hand dismissively, but her eyes shone with affection. You're stronger than you think. You always have been. As we talked, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The challenges had been immense, but they had taught me the importance of standing up for myself and my family. I had faced betrayal and manipulation, but I had also found resilience and hope. Later, as I walked back to Mia's apartment, I found a small envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a note from Sylvia, her handwriting elegant and precise. Elara, I've taken some time to reflect on my actions. I realize now how much I've hurt you and the family. I'm truly sorry. I hope we can find a way to move forward, for the sake of the ones we love. I read the note twice, feeling a mix of emotions. Sylvia's words were unexpected, a glimmer of vulnerability that hinted at the possibility of change. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start. That evening, Nolan came by to pick up our child for his weekend visit. We exchanged a few words, the atmosphere between us more relaxed than it had been in a long time. Mom wrote to me, I said, handing him the note. He read it, a thoughtful expression on his face. "She's trying, I think. It's not easy for her to admit she was wrong." I nodded, understanding the complexities of family dynamics all too well. "It's a step in the right direction." As Nolan left, I felt a sense of closure, a realization that the future was ours to shape. We had been through so much, but we had emerged stronger, ready to build a new foundation based on trust and mutual respect. The days turned into weeks, and life continued to unfold in its unpredictable way. There were still challenges, but I faced them with a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. One afternoon, as I sat in the park with my child, watching the world go by, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the lessons learned, for the friendships that had sustained me, and for the chance to create a life filled with love and possibility. And though there were still questions, still uncertainties that lingered, I knew that I was ready to face them head-on. My journey had taught me that true strength came from within, from the courage to stand up for what mattered most. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the park, I felt a quiet contentment settle over me. The path ahead was open, filled with promise and hope, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms.